So we know a lot about Michael Jackson, and you were just talking about him. What on those albums, Thriller for example, is you? You know, you have his music, some of his writing, some of his
but look,
influence.
we take his stuff and take it to another level.
When Michael was 19, when we first worked together, he was co-starring him, and I was the musical director. I was resisting it for the score of the movie version of The Wiz. We worked on The Wiz first, and he said, I'm going to go be on Epic, and I'd like you to help me find a producer. I said, Michael, I don't want to talk about that. You don't even have a song in the picture yet.
The greatest creative partnership in music history came to an end on November 3rd, 2024, when Quincy Jones passed away at the age of 91. 7 decades of genius ended in a single moment. But the legacy of what Quincy accomplished, particularly in building Michael Jackson from a talented child performer into the undisputed king of pop, remains the most transformative artist-producer relationship in the history of recorded music. The world lost not just a man, but an irreplaceable force of creativity. Quincy Jones didn't just work with Michael Jackson. He fundamentally shaped who Michael became as an artist, who he would grow into, what he would achieve. Before Quincy, Michael was talented, yes, but he was also limited by the constraints of what came before. He was a child star operating within the Jackson 5 structure, constrained by family dynamics and commercial expectations. Quincy showed him what was possible. Quincy challenged him. Quincy pushed him to transcend his own expectations and the world's expectations of what he could be. The numbers tell a story that's almost impossible to comprehend in scope and scale. Quincy earned 28 Grammy Awards across his 7 decades in the music business, more than almost any other producer or musician in history. He also earned an Emmy and a Tony, making him one of the few artists ever to win across all major award categories. He produced countless classics, shaped entire genres, influenced generations of musicians. But his partnership with Michael Jackson represents perhaps his greatest achievement and most lasting legacy. This is what he'll be remembered for. Off the Wall, released in 1979, was supposed to be a modest solo project. Michael Jackson was transitioning from the Jackson 5 to a solo career, and the plan was to create a solid debut album that would establish him as a credible solo artist. Quincy Jones had other ideas that went far beyond what anyone expected. He elevated everything to unprecedented levels. He pushed for higher production values than anyone thought possible. He brought in session musicians of the highest caliber. The resulting album was a masterpiece that showed the world Michael could carry an album entirely on his own. Then came 1982 and Thriller. Quincy and Michael created the best-selling album in human history, with no competition even close. Over 70 million copies sold worldwide, more than any other album ever released. Not just a commercial success, but a cultural phenomenon that changed popular music forever. The album was produced with meticulous care, every song crafted to perfection, every detail considered and reconsidered. Quincy pushed Michael harder than anyone had before. He insisted on Eddie Van Halen playing the guitar solo on Beat It, bringing rock credibility to a pop song and showing the world that pop and rock weren't enemies. He brought in Vincent Price to voice the spoken word section on Thriller itself, adding an element of horror and theatrical menace that elevated the song beyond typical pop structures. Quincy understood that Michael was capable of working with the very best musicians and producers on the planet, and he was ruthless about making that happen. Bad, released in 1987, represented another evolution, though the working relationship between Michael and Quincy was beginning to show strain. They created an undeniable classic with an aggressive sound and image. But you could sense that Michael was starting to exert more control over his own creative direction. The collaboration was as fruitful as ever, but Michael was beginning to stretch his wings in ways that Quincy couldn't completely contain. The partnership was evolving into something different. Before Quincy entered Michael's life, Michael Jackson was a child star. Talented, yes, but operating within very specific constraints. He sang songs written by others. He performed choreography created by choreographers. He was a prodigy, but not yet an artist, in full control of his own vision. Quincy saw something in Michael that went beyond talent. He saw potential for greatness on a scale that most people couldn't imagine. After their collaborations and the success that followed, Michael became the biggest entertainer on Earth. He didn't just compete with other artists. He transcended the category of what a pop star could be. He became a cultural force, a global phenomenon, an artist who influenced how music was made across all genres and generations. Quincy didn't do this alone. Michael's talent was real. His work ethic was legendary. His dedication was absolute. But Quincy was the bridge between Michael's potential and his actual achievement. The working relationship was intense and demanding. They challenged each other constantly. Creative disagreements weren't avoided or smoothed over. They were engaged with directly. Quincy would push Michael to do something he hadn't attempted before. Michael would resist, would question, would push back. And through that friction, magic was created. They brought out the absolute best in each other. By the time Michael began working with Teddy Riley on Dangerous, the sound had shifted dramatically. Michael wanted a different sonic palette. He wanted to explore new production techniques. He was ready to move beyond Quincy's influence, even as he built everything on the foundation that Quincy had helped create. Quincy also produced We Are the World, the charity single that brought together virtually every major artist of the 1980s to raise awareness about world hunger. This wasn't Michael's song alone, but Michael's voice was featured prominently, and Quincy's production was the spine that held the entire project together. It's another example of Quincy's ability to elevate everyone around him to their highest level, to orchestrate talent on an unprecedented scale. The legacy of Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson's collaboration has never been surpassed in the history of recorded music. In the history of recorded music, you might point to other great producer-artist relationships: Phil Spector and the Ronettes, George Martin and the Beatles, Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. But none of them resulted in the level of commercial success, cultural impact, and artistic achievement that Quincy and Michael accomplished together. The numbers are simply incomparable. When Quincy passed, the music industry paused. Not because he was old, though he was 91. Not because his career was behind him, though it certainly was. But because the world recognized that one of the towering figures of 20th century music, a man who literally shaped how popular music sounded, was gone. The legacy of what he built with Michael Jackson endures forever. It endures in every pop music production that draws on techniques he pioneered. It endures in the careers of countless artists he mentored. It endures in the hearts of billions of people who grew up listening to the music he created with Michael Jackson. Quincy Jones didn't just produce Michael Jackson's albums. He built the king of pop from a talented child star into a global phenomenon. And that's a legacy that will never be forgotten. A legacy that will continue to inspire and influence music for generations to come. This is the story of how one man shaped the career of another and changed the world forever. What made Quincy special wasn't just his technical skill, though his technical skill was legendary. It was his vision. He could hear what a song could become before it existed. He could imagine a finished product and then work backward to make it happen. He could hear Eddie Van Halen and Beat It before Eddie even knew what song he was playing on. He could envision Vincent Price narrating Thriller before the concept even existed. This ability to imagine possibilities and then manifest them is what separated Quincy from every other producer working at that time. Quincy also understood the importance of the human element in music. He believed in surrounding artists with the best musicians, the best engineers, the best environment possible. He invested in making the studio experience excellent because he understood that the quality of the experience influences the quality of the product. This philosophy meant that when Michael came into a Quincy Jones studio, he was coming into an environment designed to bring out the absolute best in him. The respect between Quincy and Michael was mutual and genuine. Michael trusted Quincy's judgment. He trusted Quincy's ear. He was willing to try things that Quincy suggested because he knew that Quincy had his best interests in mind. This trust is the foundation of any great creative partnership. Without it, the collaboration becomes adversarial or transactional. With it, the collaboration becomes transformative. After their work together ended, both artists continued to achieve tremendous success. but there's a sense that neither of them quite achieved what they had accomplished together. Michael went on to make important albums like Dangerous and History, but they didn't have the same cultural impact as Thriller or Bad. This isn't a criticism of Michael. It's a recognition of how rare and special the collaboration between Quincy and Michael actually was. It was lightning in a bottle. It was a moment in time when two artistic geniuses aligned perfectly. The musical innovations that Quincy and Michael developed together are still being used today. Producers still reference their techniques. Artists still try to capture that same magic. But capturing it requires more than just knowing the technical details. It requires having two artists with the commitment to excellence that both Quincy and Michael possessed. It requires having a vision that's ambitious enough to change the entire culture. It requires having the courage to attempt things that have never been done before. Quincy's passing felt like the end of an era because in many ways it was. He was the last surviving architect of some of the most important music ever made. His death reminds us that these incredible moments in cultural history are created by specific people at specific times, and they can't be easily replicated. We can honor them. We can study them. We can be inspired by them. But we can't go back and recreate them. All we can do is move forward, carrying their influence with us, hoping that future generations of artists will be inspired to achieve their own greatness the way Michael and Quincy inspired us all.